Yes, hello, folks. Welcome to the weekly Manchester United podcast. I'm your host, as always, Phil Brand, joined with my regular co-host, the excellent James Rhodes. James, how you doing, mate?
Pretty good, doing well. And you?
Not too bad. I just lied, but other than that, I'm doing okay. It's been a bit of an interesting few
Other than
days.
all the bad things, it's okay.
It's all right. But all good. I'm alive and breathing, so I can't complain, or maybe that's not a good thing. Um, but lots to talk about, of course. Been very
Yes.
busy week since we last spoke. Lots of things happening. The Xerxes signing got completed. Preseason game against Rosenborg took place. The Euro, Kambala, Greenwood, Sancho, and lots of other stuff happening. So much to get through. Um, I suppose we'll start with the preseason game yesterday. Predictably, there was some reaction to a preseason game that I felt was a bit over the top, where people were already professing doom for the season. And I mean, there was some, not gonna lie, there was some things there that were a hangover from last season. The number of
Yeah.
22 shots they conceded in that game. Uh, but these were games that were once you found out about that were in the corner of a column of a newspaper in the back of you know a program or
Mm-hmm.
a fanzine that you ignored because it wasn't really relevant. Most of the team that was out there yesterday will not be near the first team at the start of the season, but there was some that still didn't look great. It was the first preseason game. What was your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, in general, obviously you have a team that from Norway there that obviously it's a much lower league, but at the same time they're also mid-season, right? So they're in kind of peak fitness level. One of the things that does show that I think people do underrate a lot of the times, you've mentioned this before on a podcast as well, though, is the gap between footballers is not as big as people often think it is, especially because you get a lot of really good athletes. There's different ability when it comes to football and technical, and these things separate players out, the football intelligence, motivation, a lot of mental aspects. But physically, there's a lot of athletes all across the world who play the sport. And so when you come up against a team that's in mid-season, that is a senior men's team and is fully fit and firing, it's no surprise they're going to be faster than you. But it also goes to show when you compare them to a bunch of kids at United who are not senior football players, the gap between men's football and the youth levels is quite big. And it's hard to rely on, you have to look at that and give players time when they're coming from youth levels and things to get in. So not too much to judge into it. I was hoping to learn a few things. I think, as fans, there's things we're going to want to see this preseason improving, right? Especially tactically, because when you look at preseason games, they're for fitness for sure, but also you like to kind of see how the team is going to play, at least how they're going to set up. Whether they execute or not, the results are not really that important. And I do think there was a couple things I noticed, which was one, the goalkeeper coming out a lot more, coming out higher in a few build-up phases that United had, especially in the first half when they were trying to control possession, and the center backs going higher. One thing I did think was notable, because there were starting players in there, was also that Mason Mount was a lot deeper. Rather than playing way up the pitch, he was more forming a partnership with Casemiro as kind of a double pivot, or however you'd say it, which is a bit more how we played towards the end of the season, instead of having two tens and one person sitting back. Um, Other than that, not that much that you can take away from it in general. My biggest concern would unfortunately be Casemiro, because while it's a preseason game and it's
Yeah,
the first one coming back, he looks, out of every player on that pitch, the slowest, the least
yeah.
interested, and the least fit. And it's kind of a bit shocking, even in a preseason game, to see that.
To me, James, there was nothing learned by Casemiro that he didn't know towards the end of last season.
Yes.
So
Yes.
he's someone that has to be replaced. I think you have to be really careful with reading too much into preseason games.
Yes.
I remember when Ronaldo made his debut for Real Madrid with Karim Benzema and all those amazing players, and it was in Ireland, in Dublin, against
Yep.
Shamrock Rovers, and they scraped a 1-0 win. right?
Yeah.
Now, like Rosenborg, just same thing. They
Mm-hmm.
were, they play through the summer, so players
Yep.
were fit.
Yep.
And in those games, it's about building up intensity. It's about, it's not about, being at your peak. It's about,
Yeah.
recovery, and build up the fitness. Van Hal, I think it was one of his first season, was he won on every preseason game.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
didn't work out. So you have to be careful with reading too much into
Correct.
it. Ten Hag was quite scathing, to be fair, afterwards.
Yeah. He wasn't
Um,
happy with it though,
no,
so I guess.
but that, what that sounded like to me? It sounded like a guy that's well aware that he doesn't have a lot of defeats left.
Correct.
That
Correct.
He's already someone that, because I did think it was a bit surprising that he could have easily given a much more benign answer. It's
Mm-hmm.
preseason, we're just getting the fit. But he was putting that pressure on right away with
Yeah.
players and saying, this is not acceptable. Even here, it's not
Yep.
acceptable.
Yep.
And look, I think when you have games like this, you want obviously people like Casemiro, Wan-Bissaka, Mason Mount, what have you, to I don't give them as much of an excuse as I will give some of the other younger players. Of the
Yeah.
younger players, if you can get one or two that shows
Yes.
they're not far off first team level, that's a success. I think Vitek
Yes.
did
VTech was
very, very
good.
well.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
thought Toby Collier played really, really well.
Yep.
Collier's interesting because he's 20. A young
Mm-hmm.
kid that they got from Brighton, defensive midfielder. He's at a point now where it's like, okay, this is where you've either got to show you're a Manchester United player or move on. I mean, if
Yes.
you look at
Yes.
Manu, who's younger than him, who's already playing for his country at the Euros. I'm not saying you have to have the same trajectory identically, but
Yeah.
this is the point where you've really got to show you're a player. And that's, you're looking, until United sign another defensive midfielder, he has to assume that there's a chance there.
Yeah.
So I thought
Yeah.
he played quite well. I thought, Face done okay. I didn't like the criticism of young Harry Amascat. I mean, I think people underestimate the nerves
Mm-hmm.
playing for
Yep.
United. You know, where you're on TV, there's
Yep.
20,000 Norwegians there. I think people underestimate, how difficult that is for young players to adapt to that level of scrutiny. Um, but there were some positives for me. I thought VTech was exceptional. I
Yeah,
thought
he
he played
was.
really, 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 really well. I would imagine he will go out on loan. Um, I asked you this earlier, but where was Anthony?
Yeah. I don't know. There's a few players missing who were recovering
Mad.
from injuries, to the end of last season and on some fitness things. Obviously, Maguire we can understand, and some of the others who've had injuries. Ahmad has had some injury issues over the last year. It's one of the reasons he didn't play much. I don't know why Anthony was missing from that game yet, as he did return with the first batch. We didn't really get any explanation on that, so I guess we'll see through this week. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not a biggest fan of Anthony. I don't want to pile on him either, but there has been times when after internationals he comes back less fit than other players.
That's
And
unacceptable. That can't happen. I'm not saying that's
yeah,
why, but that's why he was missing. But that's something that can't
yeah.
happen this season.
And you don't know why, but if he's back and he returned with everybody else, I don't know why he wasn't fit enough for however to be selected to play with the rest of the seniors that went on there. Fitness they obviously got to build and all of that, but Wan-Bissaka, Mount, Rashford, Casemiro, they were there. I mean, every one of them. So I'm not sure the reason. There's another one on Saturday. Obviously, a week more of fitness under everyone's belt, and then we'll see. But you'd expect he's got to be able to make it into the preseason squads, right?
On the flip side, young player that impressed was Halseth Naipan, if I'm saying that correctly, young Norwegian midfielder. That predictably there was
Mm,
rumours emerging afterwards of United's interest in him. That's the type of player you would imagine that would appeal to Ineos and United.
yes.
Not wanting to repeat the Holland mistake, United have very good contacts in Norway. Looks like a very, very good young midfielder.
Yeah, and did a nice preseason game that probably helped them over there make a little bit of money. So You would think that that was a smart play in there if they do have any interest, and there's some very kind of tacit reports on that. But he looked good. I mean, definitely among all the players on the pitch, he stood out for sure on both sides. It was quite impressive technical ability. Everything he was doing was smart. Really like that, and it would be lovely to make those kind of signings because obviously we'll talk about the midfield, but you have to look at it and say beyond Bruno, Mount, and Kobbie Mainoo, you don't have a lot of settled midfielders at United. Getting more top young talent in for the future is important. You look at what Madrid have done, stacking up their midfield and the number of players that they have there, and that City have done over the years. Definitely quite impressive.
You know, if there was one thing that stood out again for me yesterday was the fact that Mount and Casemiro can't play in the same midfield.
Mm,
Is that there has to be another player in there for me. But I just think that the gaps between them are so big that Mount wants to play really, really high. Hopefully he stays fit because we haven't really seen Mason Mount yet.
yeah,
But I've never once seen a game where I felt I'm comfortable with how he fits into this midfield. They obviously need to send another midfielder. They have to, James. That is
yeah.
something they must do. I would be really worried if United went into the season with exactly the same midfield that they ended up with. But I'm still puzzled as to how he fits in.
I am as well, and the midfield is a conundrum, right? Because when we look at the summer so far, we've got Joshua Xerxes signed. You've got offers and bids left and right for center backs. Understandably, Rafael Varane has departed, so we have to sign a center back. But the midfield is as much or more of a concern, no doubt. I mean, anybody who watched last season will look at it and say, this isn't going to work anymore. We can't do that again. There's no way you can just say, we'll run it back and it'll be better next season. Towards the end of the year, Kobbie Mainoo was suffering quite a bit playing in that team until the little switch at the end of the season, which was a much more compact team and is probably not in general the way we want to go forward. It was difficult. He was finding it difficult just because it was impossible to cover the spaces that he was supposed to cover in that setup. We know Bruno Fernandes is going to play. We know Kobbie Mainoo is going to play. I don't know what the plan is with Mason Mount. It's confusing, in there for sure. It's sort of not understandable. I can get it if he's going to rotate with Bruno. We're actually going to rotate him, and he's going to rotate with Kobbie Mainoo. He's actually going to rotate, but there's a lot of other midfielders in there. There's a lot more needed to balance that midfield out because you're going to need someone with some serious legs next to Kobbie Mainoo and Bruno, not much less next to Mason Mount and Bruno to cover those distances. And neither Casemiro nor Amrabat is that guy. Neither of them has the legs to cover those kind of spaces and distances and do all of that. So certainly it's kind of the one thing where I think I could live with one center back. I really could. And having Maguire and Lindelof and Evans as backup options, I could live with that. I can live with our attacking options. I cannot live with the midfield options we have right now. I just don't see how it works at all.
What I will say is, Ineos don't strike me as the type of people to see a need and ignore it. They
Yeah.
look like the type of people that if they see a pressing need, they will do something to address it.
Yep.
The fact that United have pretty much agreed a deal for Mason Greenwood, they've of course
Yes.
Willie Kwambala is out. That would essentially cover what Xerxes has cost,
Yep.
more or less. So there's still some room there to go do some stuff. I would imagine it will be other players being sold too.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you about the Willie Kambwala deal because to me, he wanted to go.
Yes.
It was the right thing to do. This is exactly what City and Real Madrid and other top clubs do: is that they sell players with the sell-on clause and with the buyback clause.
Yep.
And I think they got a decent fee for a kid that, without injuries, if there was no injuries, probably wouldn't have played for United this
Yep.
season. He did do quite well when he did. But I have no issues with this team.
Yeah, it's a good one. And, similar, they did a deal with Alvaro Fernandez in the end as well, right? From January and they activated that option. A different one because it was a loan with an option, but a similar deal where there's, I think, a couple clauses in there on sell-ons and matching rights and things like that. It makes a lot of sense because what we've seen in the past is players stagnate. You look at, Facundo Pellistri has definitely suffered from this, where this is the type of deal that should have probably been done for him 2 years ago now, where if he wasn't going to play a lot, sell him, get a sell-on clause, get a buyback in there, and make a little bit of money back and see how it goes, and end up with all these young players out there. And the more of those that work out, the more fees you're going to get for those players in the future. That's one of the reasons City are able to do it, because so many of the players they've sold have ended up being good players in the future. Joshua Zirkzee, who we just bought, Bayern had a buyback on and a 50% sell-on clause. They made 20 million from that deal, 20 million euros. And so I think it's a great deal, and it's a sign of the forward thinking aspect of it, rather than hoarding players like assets, on a book, and saying, well, yeah, there's making that decision, if they're not going to be ready to play now and they're at that age, then they're going to go. And it's also a matter of contracts too. I think it shows a priority where they don't want players walking for free, and they're willing to sell them in that final year, which is the same reason why right now, of course, Victor Lindelof and Wan-Bissaka are in that kind of position where they need to clarify their futures as well.
Someone as well, Scott McTominay, Galatasaray, allegedly interested in him. I think that these are players that will be sold if the right offer arrives.
Yes.
In the past, obviously, Scott McTominay, of course, is fantastic for FFP if they sell him, straight profit. But quite an important squad player. I mean, I think it's easy to turn around and say, let's get rid of him without thinking about, okay, who else is going to come in? Zirkzee gives United what Scott McTominay offers them. He gives he's 6'4", he gives them height on set pieces, going forward. He's not just a goal scorer. I heard some of the stuff that Thiago Motta said about him, which was quite interesting. Maybe overrating him slightly, but he's a player that has enormous variation to his game that gives United something different. So maybe Ten Hag feels that with Zirkzee in the squad, he could let McTominay go. He was willing to let him go last summer, of course, same as Maguire. I think that these are deals that United would want to do earlier in the window rather than later, so that Ten Hag's confident they'll get replacements. But do you think what do you think of Scott McTominay?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting one, because for me with Scott, it always depends on, like, my feelings about him always depend on more what's going on around him. I don't think Scott McTominay should stay as a player who's going to be regularly starting in the midfield, because when that happens, it doesn't work. We need to make signings so that Scott McTominay isn't relied on to be a regular, like, midfielder, where he doesn't really have his strengths. However, Scott McTominay is a squad player who comes in, offers you something different, crashes the box, does a bit of that. He's actually quite exceptional in some of those traits. And so it's a little bit tough, because it's kind of a luxury player in essence. And you have to look at it and say, is the player willing to accept a role where they're not going to play that much? And they're going to be coming off the bench when you need goals, later in games. They're going to be, rotating into games when you feel you have enough control to get some, to get him in there where he's not offering you as much outside of that in the midfield, or even that you're throwing him almost as another forward. So, that's where it's a bit tricky. And I think that it's really going to come down to him to a large degree, and the offers that come in. Because they're going to sit there and discuss and say, one, if you're going to stay, we probably want a new contract. They don't want him to go for free in the end. But what are they offering? What kind of wages? What kind of squad role? What kind of minutes? All of those things that are in that discussion. And will he accept that and want to stay at United, or will he want to leave? And if he does, then they're going to have to bring something better than 10 million from Galatasaray, because you need more than that for Scott McTominay. He's worth more than that as a player,
way
for
more.
sure. Yeah,
Definitely.
30, 40 million is a fair price for the player that scores the number of goals he does, and his experience in the Premier League, there's a lot of clubs, I think, you think of Fulham's and Everton's and West Ham's that could definitely take him and do well with him for 30,
He would
40 million.
improve a lot of teams outside
Yeah.
the top 7 for me.
Yeah.
Seriously. I mean,
Yeah, he would.
I wouldn't want to. He is someone that if he's playing against you, you would be a bit concerned about, because he
Yes.
scores goals. He's someone that scores important goals. He's someone that is awkward to mark. He's dangerous on set pieces. He's someone that if you played it with strengths, people always point out the things that he can't do, but you point out the things that he can do.
Yep.
And there aren't many midfielders out there that you can get at that price that are getting you close to double figures. I mean, in my opinion, Ten Hag wouldn't have a job without him. There's no doubt about it, because
it was pretty bad at one point.
You think about that Burnley game.
Yeah.
Or was it the
Brentford,
Brentford
the two
game?
goals.
Yes,
Yeah.
Brentford game of 2. That was massive.
Mm.
In my opinion, it was right after the international break. United had been poor, or right before, I think it was.
Yep.
And
Before. Yep.
And United had been poor. He scores 2 goals in the last minute to win them a game that they badly needed to win. And before international breaks, that's when managers get sacked.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have found it really hard to believe that Ten Hag wouldn't have been sacked over one of those international break windows if McTominay hadn't won that. You always felt like, okay, this is going to be the minute where United are revitalized, that this is going to be the moment where they kick on. Never did, but I think that
it gave that feeling for sure of like, maybe we could build on this. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wouldn't be desperate to let him go. Casemiro is someone, in my opinion, absolute certainty has to go.
Yeah.
If they get a decent offer from Saudi, the wages you would see of everything else, cut your losses and go. Jadon Sancho. Now, we've talked about Sancho before. I understand that everyone has their own views on it. And my own is what he did wasn't so much what he did, it was how it was handled by both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To me, like, okay, the offense itself, the response to the offense is almost worse than the offense itself.
Right.
Like, I think that if I'm Sancho's agent, I would have said to him, I don't care if you hate the guy. I don't care if you think he's 110% wrong. Apologize.
Yep.
Because this doesn't help you to sit and not play for the next 4 to 5 months. And
yep.
I think both were poorly advised. I still have a feeling that it would want to sell him if the right offer came in. But what else can they do if there's no serious offers on the table? This is the only option available to all parties, is the attempt to reconcile. And now Jadon Sancho's in an interesting position because he has to play his way back into the team. I don't know where he fits in the team, but he has to ask himself some big questions, because for him to get a move, even if he still wants to get away, he now has to perform for United, not for Borussia Dortmund, not for someone else. He now has to do for United what he did at Borussia Dortmund. So he's at a really inflection point in his career where it's like, either I focus on being, a player that fulfills their potential and a player that wants to be successful and does all the right things that you need to be successful, lives right, eats right, sleeps right, gives 110% in performances, in training. It's easy to fix, being late. That's not a difficult problem to fix. But he's at this point now, James, where he has to prove not just to Ten Hag, but to all of football,
correct,
that he's still a top-class player. Because if he doesn't, where's his next move?
Correct. Yeah. It's going to be really difficult there. And that it really is the problem. And, the outcome of the whole situation that happened was a lose-lose for everybody. And that's really why I think the kind of new leadership were so unhappy with it. The club didn't win by freezing Jadon Sancho out and having his value go to nothing, and paying wages for someone to not play for them and not have deals on the table and have nowhere to send him.
Did Ten Hag win this battle?
He didn't, but I think where I said I think that grown-ups are running it now is that forget the battle. right? Like walk away from the battle,
But
essentially,
do you not think
is
it's
the way that
important
I
to set
see
a
it.
precedent? You don't think it's important to set a I mean, I get what you're saying, but there's
Yeah,
another side to this where the club is like, this is not just about Jadon Sancho, it's about an example to other players. This is a precedent. The discipline will not be
yeah,
compromised. These are club rules, and if you don't adhere
correct.
to them, so in that
That's what
sense,
I
it
mean
did not
by it,
win.
though. That's what I mean in that sense is that when I take it away, like it's maybe you change the battlefield, right? Because you really don't want your coach going to war with players. You don't
Agreed,
want that. We've talked about
100%.
that.
Yeah,
So you take
yeah.
this battle that's been Sancho versus Ten Hag, and you say that battle's over. Now Sancho's battle is to prove it to the club that he's worth something, that he's a football player. Now his battle is to prove it to the rest of the people in football that he's worth something, that he's a player who can be disciplined, who can do all of this. If it doesn't go well, it's not going to be because of Ten Hag now. There's no discussion that it's because of Ten Hag. That has nothing to do with a conflict with Ten Hag. It's going to be on him versus the club at that point in time. But that's how it should be. We talked about that. And that's, to me, that's actually supporting the manager a lot more because it makes the job a way harder for them to do when they're having to fight those battles that they shouldn't have to. Someone has
See,
to take that off of them.
Sancho is in exactly the same position right now that he was in September.
Yes.
And so they find a way to reconcile the differences, train, get back on the pitch, and show your worth. This is
Yep.
exactly where he was
Yes.
in September. This is why you need good advisors around you that doesn't enable
Yep.
your stupidity. That
Yep.
is able to sit you down and say, "Look, I understand you're emotional. I understand you feel you're right. I understand, but
Yeah.
this is how we handle this." And
And he had players and friends in the dressing room who were telling him to as well, and just
mhm,
wanting to put it to bed. A lot of them. I mean, he's close with Marcus, Harry Maguire. Them they were telling him to put it to bed.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
sure, on his side of it, definitely it could have been a lot better. But essentially, with Ineos in charge, we've gotten a little bit of a reset. Everybody gets a reprieve a little bit on this and to start fresh. But that also means there's no excuses. There's
So where
nowhere
does he
to
play?
hide and
Please,
nowhere to run. Where does he
where,
play?
where does he play? I
Yeah,
mean, Ten
well,
Hag bought Mason Mount with Sancho there, so he
yeah,
has to
I
have
know.
some concept of a team where both of them can play in it. I mean, if you look at
Well,
where he was playing last summer, was essentially in that
mm,
10 position, that false name, whatever you want to call it.
it's almost what
So
Xerxes going to play in, funnily enough. But yeah, yeah,
then you have the issue of Ahmad and everyone else, and
yeah.
okay,
Well,
because they want to
yeah,
play too. I would imagine it will sell Palestri.
yeah, for sure. And then you you still have Anthony too, but uh, but I think that if you kind of look at it in some sense, if he works his way back in, and look, I think if he's sold, they probably don't replace him this summer. Okay, to be clear, right? So, if they do get a good offer, I don't think they're going to go ahead and replace him now after getting
Yeah,
Xerxes in. But in some sense, if you consider that Garnacho is essentially nailed down the right wing spot, and United don't seem to be chasing a right winger at this point in time, then you've got on the right, and you remember one of the complaints we had last year that I think was valid, hence Xerxes coming in, was that the dynamic of Rashford, Hoyland, and Garnacho didn't really work that great, even though they're your three best players by far for the front line, because they're all doing the same thing. They're all occupying the same spaces. They're all running into the channels and essentially, to some degree, getting in each other's way. And just from a team dynamics, it wasn't the best. So mixing the profiles, I think, in the front line is important. Marcus Rashford probably should have more ability to be benched for his own good, for fitness, for health, for everything. But you don't have a much better right wing. So I'm kind of looking at it and saying, if you can get Sancho going, the benefit is you could play Sancho with Hoyland and Garnacho, and it's less of a problem of profiles as it is when Rashford is there too. And so I would look at Sancho and say he could be the backup left winger. If Garnacho's your starting right winger, then Sancho can be your backup left winger behind Rashford and provide something different profile wise. And that would be probably the best place for him to work himself into the team. It would allow Rashford to get more rest, more rotation as well, and offer you something different, which I think is necessary and kind of fixing these kind of squad dynamics overall. So I think that's the best bet for him would be to work his way into that left side.
Okay, so this is probably changing as we speak because there's been so much going on. The Lenny Euro situation, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, all depends on what guy you want to believe. I was wondering who the things are happening guy was going to be this summer. To see what guy was going to emerge off the back of United with endless transfer rumors, people that I'd never heard of before.
Mm.
So lots of discussion about whether Lenny Euro will come to Manchester United or not. The reports by David Ornstein are it'll be either Euro or Delict. I thought it was quite interesting to see United allegedly go after Jonathan Tah, which seemed to me more or less a bit of a game with Bayern that either you drop your price on Delict or we'll go after your target, which is some shithousery that we haven't seen from United in a long time, which was welcome. But Lenny Euro, very talented young kid, 18. Some people say that he will not go to United. Some people say that he will. What do you know about it?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of interesting. There's things we'll never know, in terms of the discussions directly between United, Lenny Euro, and Georgia Mendes, and they have a good relationship with Mendes for what it's worth. Ineos do as well, and so I'm sure they're kind of on top of it. And given the people that we have in place, I think it is quite telling the Delict versus Euro situation. I was pointing out recently in a video that the Delict thing's kind of been sitting for about 2.5 weeks now in almost the exact same spot as it was before. I thought it became rather clear they were holding off on it in case they can get Lenny Euro in, who, as described by Ornstein and others, is almost like one of those unmissable opportunity players you go for. If you can get him, you've got to be in the discussion. And to be fair, United have put themselves in the discussion. They've made a bid. They've been accepted. He's still not gone to Madrid. And it seems like whatever reason there is behind it, they're willing to wait and hold off on pursuing or finishing Delict. And I would think they know what they're doing a little bit more than maybe the Frankie de Jong thing from a couple of years ago, which people draw parallels to, where I think he'd more explicitly said no, and there was the hope that Ten Hag could bring him in as his former coach, versus something like this. They must have some kind of encouragement.
I think one of the things that's quite interesting in this, I think one of the reasons why they prefer Euro over Delict is simply wages. Delict makes a lot of money. If you look
Yes.
at Xerxes wages, right? Xerxes is making less than what Brandon Williams was making, which is quite staggering. And you can see that Ineos have been working really hard to get the wage bill down. And I think their preference would be, okay, let's get this 18-year-old kid in. Be making a lot less money. The acquisition fee would probably be similar to what they're going to pay for Delict, but they would be making a lot less. I think Delict is much easier to justify if you're getting rid of a Lindelof or a Maguire, because then it becomes a lot easier. So it's possible United could go back in for a Delict if a Lindelof or a Maguire leaves, even with the Euro. But I think they're prioritizing players that aren't quite at that level yet, the very top level, where they can, they're not paying 300 grand a week. I would imagine this will be the same with the Ugarte, because they, understandably, they don't want to pay that type of money. And this is something that is very real for everyone, not just United, for everybody. So I would imagine that, Euro, exceptional young talent, of course, but also would be significantly cheaper
on wages.
and Real Madrid are not stupid either, James. I mean, they're not going to turn around and hand Lenny Euro 250 grand a week.
Nope.
I mean, the lure of Madrid is the club. And I can understand if the kid has preference to go there. I get that. But I think for any of us, you look at all aspects of the deal. I think if you can do one between Euro and Delict, you do Euro.
Yeah. Well, and obviously the money is a factor, but it's also tying into that risk, that risk factor. He's a younger player. You're paying a lot of wages for Delict. He's had quite a number of injuries over the last few years as well. And the last thing that they want to do right now is make financial mistakes. So it's not that Delict is a bad signing or a bad player. He's a very good player, and I think he'd be a great signing. And there's still a decent chance that United end up with him this summer. But
Mm,
when you're talking about that kind of risk assessment, they'd certainly rather get a top young talent on lower wages, who compared to some of the risks that
sure.
that they'd have to consider with Matthias de Ligt as well. And then part of it is, yeah, I mean, there's definitely that aspect to it. That's important. So I think they're keeping their options open, and I think the positive of it is not putting themselves in the situation where they're having to wait till one is done before they try to start the delict conversations. I think that's the real benefit of it. If tomorrow Lenny Yoro says no, then they could probably finish the delict deal in a matter of a couple of days, and you're not dragging things out into mid-August and paying these inflated fees and ending up paying an extra on top of that. But it's an interesting one, and I like the approach overall. When you look at their two seemingly top targets at center back, were Gerard Braithwaite, Lenny Yoro, young players who would be on lower wages, that are young, top kind of exciting talents. But I think both of them are really good. When you look at it, are definitely the level of young players you want to get in the door, and that if you can get them, you get them. And depending on sales and things, the other interesting aspect to that is that in the Euro or Delict category is neither actually fills the need that Gerard Braithwaite filled, which was a big, tall, fast, left-footed center back who can also cover left back, which is something that I think the Athletic guys just mentioned on their podcast today. Is that that's sort of one of the reasons as well. It's either or, is they're probably going to want to go back in for another center back on the left side afterwards
Hmm.
and get someone who can cover left back, because all you have is Luke Shaw. We know his injury problems. We know what's happened there. Malacia
Have you
has been
seen the
out.
Ratcliffe video? Don't tear your hamstring, Luke Shaw.
What's
I, I,
that?
I I was just thinking of Jim Ratcliffe's video when he was saying, "Don't
Yeah,
tear your
right.
hamstring, Luke
Yeah,
Shaw."
it's pretty funny. He knows. Everybody knows, right, about Luke Shaw's injury problems, right? And we can hope he can stay healthy, and they're working on that. But
Jim looked like he'd had about 20 pints and a bunch of shaking
but
fact.
Malacia's returned to training individually after 14 months of being out. Okay, you still have no idea whether he's going to be fitting at that level, or even if he's good enough to replace Luke Shaw at this point in time. There's a lot, so you need that coverage. And you were mentioning this about Braithwaite and why it might be worth paying over the odds for him, is because of that being able to cover left back as well. I
Hard to see
wouldn't
it happen,
be. I know
James.
it would be difficult because of the
With
Onana.
Onana going
Yeah,
to
yeah,
Villa, it's hard to see it happening now,
yeah.
to be honest.
Yeah, I was going to
Um,
say I wouldn't be surprised to see them try again one more time, but
mm,
really difficult now. But
mm.
yeah, I think simply because of that reason, though, because otherwise, who are you getting who's a left center back who can cover fullback also at a competent level? It's tough. It's a smaller market for that kind of more specific type of player who's actually going to be worth spending the money on.
Another piece of encouraging news was the return of Trail Malacia to
Yes.
training. Putting it in a bit of a weird situation, because do you trust your left back options? Luke Shaw back fit. He looks great when he
Mm-hmm.
comes back fit playing. Don't hold him accountable for Spain's first goal, by the way. But he makes such a difference when
He
he
does.
plays.
Yeah.
You've got Malacia. Do you bring in another left back? And do you turn around and say, look, last season will not be repeated. We're not going to have both these left backs out the whole
Mm-hmm.
season. Do you go out
Yep.
and sign one? Because it's one of those things that if both those players get injured and any of us don't do something, they're going to get slaughtered. But if they do
Yeah.
something, how do you play? How do you have three left backs?
Yep. I agree. Well, but here's one of the factors. I don't think Malacia will be fit by the start of the season. I don't think he's going to be match fit by the start of the season. I think it's going to be difficult there in general. But I think they have to do one of two things. Like they have two choices in this, which is one, sign a left-footed center back who will cover in there, so they have a third option as needed, or two, sign another left back and have Luke Shaw be able to cover at left center back too, which he can quite competently as well. But that means you need a really good left back. I'm not talking like someone who's not great. You want one who's capable of starting regularly in case you need Luke Shaw covering at left center back. So you got to do one of those two. You've got to get that left center back in who can cover it, or you're going to have to sign a fullback. I think you don't have a choice. We can't go with Shaw and Malaysia and nobody else able to cover on that side. We just can't.
Lisandro Martinez looks like he's back to full fitness.
Yes.
There was a moment during a Copa America final when he was down, and I swear to God,
stress me out.
please.
I know.
You know that, but 120 minutes, brilliant.
He played 60, 80 more minutes after that, so I'm sure he was okay. Yeah.
So he brilliant centre back, just fantastic player. Brilliant to see him back. Very encouraging, and again, a transformative football player. Man, I believe that he was so influential in that cup final. The difference that he makes in it is massive.
Yes.
So encouraging to see him back, but again, a vulnerability on that left-hand side that United cannot have next season. So encouraging to see that. Rangers this weekend. Do we know if Onana, if any of the other players will be back, Ahmad or Anthony, or
they should, yeah. I think that. But
do we know if any of those players will return by then?
Yeah, so they're expected to. We'll see about Maguire because he's still working on that individual fitness kind of program and getting up.
Sancho will be in the squad this weekend.
Sancho's available, yeah, and he should be ready because he's not having injury. He just returned a few days later, so he wasn't ready, but he should be available for the Rangers.
What type of response do you think you'll get from United fans?
It's a good question. I don't honestly know. I mean, the thing with football fans is they have long and very short memories at the same time. If he plays well, it'll go well. He'll get a good reception. If he gives the energy and the effort, like this is what if I was Jadon Sancho, the first thing I'd be doing in a preseason game is busting my ass into some sort of tackle or press or something like that instantly. Put yourself out, put your body about, put it on the line, and show something like that. And I think you do that, you win people over pretty quick. I think Ten Hag, kind of his approach to it will help too, essentially.
I think it helps Sancho that he starts in preseason. Those games are away from home. Before you get a game at Old Trafford where you've got 80,000 people, they're coming out here to the United States. They're, so he can go and try to, by the time the season starts, we're playing for real in front of, United fans that, it's not a bunch of kids and all that. But there's 80,000 people inside Old Trafford that you're going to see week in, week out. If he has a decent preseason, a really good preseason, shows the attitude that you have talked about, I think that would help him immensely. I think it would also help Jadon Sancho immensely. And United have to be smart about this to do an interview, maybe with the MUTV or something. And even if he doesn't mean it, to give some sort of apology to the fans and a commitment that, this is behind him, that he wants to be successful for the football club. I do think that would definitely help him a lot. But I want him to succeed. I can't, it's very difficult for me to invest in someone else's downfall emotionally and take any type of pleasure from that. I'm upset. I was upset at the way he handled things, no doubt. But, human beings we're full of flaws, we're full of mistakes, we're full of stupidity. I've made trillions of bad decisions, but none of them are sinister. They're just stupidity.
For sure. And I made the comparison in the last podcast, which I said I wasn't, and then I did. But it's like I said, he didn't do what the other forward who's departing United did. It's a different discussion. And I hope he returns. I hope he wins. I hope everything goes well for United. And it would be nice. I mean, it'd be nice. They put a little bit of even some little content of him interacting with Ten Hag in
Yeah,
training. Things like that would make a big difference, I think,
need some
in helping
positive
people
PR.
get on board. And it would be good for everybody because it's like I said. That's why I say take the battle out of it. It's don't make it a war in the dressing room. Show that they're on the same side, they're behind the manager, they're all together, and it'll be easier for fans to get on board as well.
Oh, I thought it was interesting that PSG are heavily pushing for, and forgive me if I butcher this name, Desiree Doué, which would indicate to me that they are quite confident Manuel Ugarte will
Yeah.
leave. If United can get Ugarte on loan with an option to buy, I think that's a dream deal.
Yeah, I think so. I think if they could get a loan, it'll be done. I think that the nature of what comes at the end of that loan will obviously be a matter of if they can. And if they can't get a loan, then it's for sure they're going to have to get a pretty good price on it. But if they can get a loan, I think they could move it a little bit quicker. But otherwise, we're probably waiting on sales in the midfield as well, which is part of the challenge there.
So if they're waiting on sales in the midfield, um, there's been some debate over whether this 45 million, 40 million net spend is real or not. I don't know. We'll find out at the
Yeah.
end of the season, at the end of the window, I suppose. But so far, even if they go out, so far they're, Xerxes going to be covered essentially by the outgoings by Alvaro Fernandez that they got 6 million for. Danny
Mm-hmm.
Van de Beek, I know that they didn't get much for, but the wage bill's gone.
Yep.
Of course, Varane's gone, Martial's gone, and so they're really at a zero net spend so far this summer, even with Xerxes coming in. They obviously have a centre back position to take care of. But you kind of squeeze a lot into a very small
Mm-hmm.
budget.
Yeah, you are. And I think realistically, I had somebody do a really good video kind of breaking down the PSR things. And one of the things also that happened is United had released some quarterly financials and last week and
Mhm.
showed a huge
Right.
loss. And United sources essentially indicated they're fine on PSR. They made it, but it is tight, really tight. They were confident they were fine, which is why they weren't doing that horse trading that the other clubs were doing. But it is definitely tight. I mean, they're not in a situation where they can go blow 300, 400 million. It's just not happening. And I think where it kind of comes down to is they probably have somewhere in the range of 50 to 70. I think it's more a realistic number is the 50 to 70 range in terms of kind of a net spend. And it doesn't always work out to the exact numbers, but you can see that they've bought Joshua Xerxes, and they have a deal on the table for 50 million euros for Lenny Euro. So
Mm.
we know they have that much money at least, right? That's what we've got for sure. Beyond that, we don't really know. And yeah, it is a bit tight, and they're going to need departures.
Well, something we said on this show last week was about how these transfer windows now and the appraisal values of players are not comparable to anything we've seen before.
Yeah,
I think it was
yeah,
like a day or two after we did that, Mikel Arteta came out and said exactly the same thing. Just said, "Look, this is
yeah,
nothing. Nothing compares to what has gone before. We're in completely new territory with
yep,
everything. That decisions that we wouldn't have made before, we now have to make with letting certain players go." And even how we recruit because it's prohibitive because of PSR. So
yep,
haggling over small fees now become really important. I mean,
yep,
even when you look at the Van de Beek thing, 400 grand, you're looking at that going, that's if you if you look at previous years, what United have spent money on. I mean, it illustrates just how tight things are
yep,
and why deals can get dragged out now because small details make a huge difference. So, I think we have to be careful. We're going, oh, well, we've had 150, 200 billion to spend in the past.
yep.
This is completely new territory. And
It
there's
really
so
is. Yeah.
few clubs with money to spend. Like, I mean, it doesn't matter who you are. Um, you know, Newcastle, I mean, there's just so few clubs with deep pockets that have the ability to go out and spend huge money. So
Yep.
I think One thing, I've said this before. I don't transfers don't move me the way they once did. They used to grip
Hmm.
me, and I used to, every minor detail I was, entertained by, and now I'm kind of like, meh, I'm a bit older now, and I don't know if my passion for the game is waning, but this is something that I'm losing interest in, and watching every minor detail of every minor movement, and it's sort of like, I don't know, I got some grief the other week for being a bit doom and gloom over some United's transfer. It's not that I think they're
But
bad signings. It's just that a couple of years ago, I was signing was like a
yeah,
massive dopamine rush, and now I'm just so indifferent about it. It's like I think United will be much, much better this season. Because I think beyond, even if they didn't make a signing, getting Shaw back, getting Martinez back will be huge for them. I think they'll be much, much better this season than what they were last season. But
I think
it's interesting my attitude towards it.
there's burnout, but then there's also the fact of like you get you get excited about signing players because you think they're going to change what you're seeing week in and week out, and you're going to see the improvement, and you could fool yourself for many years. I think all of us into feeling like, well, if
Mm.
we just got that guy, we're going to go to the next level. If we just got this player, we're going to go to the next
Mm.
level. And then we get them and it goes to shit like more than half the time. And so you start thinking, how can I get excited about this when more than likely this player's not going to work out? I mean, look at all the money we've
Well,
spent.
let me
And
ask you this: how did you feel when Xerxes signed?
I felt
Did it
good.
move you in any way?
I liked it. One, I was expecting it because that's the other aspect is how much more coverage we put on all of these things as well. Um, I wasn't over the moon for sure. I would not say I get as excited at all about signings as I used to when
Mm.
it's done. It's more like, okay, that's good. Let's move on to the next one and the next thing. And
Mm.
for the most part, I'm sitting here like, I just want a season to start because I want to see how it goes.
Mm.
And I want to watch the matches and I want them to be good. I mean, that at the end of the day, I think that's the only aspect of it where I'll get real excited is when they get going and it works, and we start winning and we start playing better, and those things happen because I don't know, too jaded
I
to some
mean,
degree to believe it at this point.
last season done a lot of psychological damage to me, and I hope it's
Oh
not
yeah,
permanent. Right?
yeah,
Because I know I'm
agreed.
serious. Like there was so many United games, but I felt like I was watching out of duty rather than out
Mm,
of love,
yep,
and it was a really weird feeling because most of the season just felt like United weren't playing for anything. Cup final, brilliant, love that.
yep,
But um, this was this really weird, listless feeling. Like they can't win the league. I lost any sense of hope that United would finish in the top four once they had an injury, once they lost Luke Shaw.
yep,
I remember saying this on the podcast back in February, I think it was, that I don't see any way United can finish in the top four without an actual left back at the football club. Um,
yep,
and it just bred this sense of indifference in me that I don't like because United have been one. I've talked about my own mental health issues and everything. The one things that's been consistent in my life that I've had this incredible love affair with, that watching United have been able to lift me out of some of the most brutal despair, and no matter what's been going on in my life, this football club and this game has completely engaged me. But for significant parts of last season, it didn't do that. I
yep,
don't know if it's VAR, if it's this malaise that's I don't like
yep,
because um there's not a lot of other things in my life that makes me feel that way. It makes me feel
yep,
that level of pleasure and that level of happiness, that level of love. And I hope I get it back because I miss that being engaged that
yep,
way. And I really hope that when the season starts, um, there's that trauma of last season, is gone. I don't know.
yeah.
I really
I hope so. Me as well. I know what you mean.
it's just like so many games were boring.
Yeah.
So many games were meaningless. There were so many times where I just felt completely disgusted at what I was watching. Like we're watching that Crystal Palace away game. I just like, what? Why am I doing this? Why am I there? They obviously don't care.
Yeah.
You know, the sacrifices that I make in my life to watch something and just feel disconnected from what I'm watching and just be like, maybe there's two players on that field in my own team that I actually like. The rest of them,
Yep.
their attitude, their body language, their you know their surrender, their capitulation, like it just infuriated me. It was like, what is left of the football club that I fell in love with? I hate the Glazers, right? I hate
Mhm.
VAR. I hate the commercialism. I hate the greed. I hate the branding. I hate the social media aspect that's turned complete arseholes into stars, into, that contaminate the whole discussion around the football club that, are basically watching a football match on a screen, right? So people can watch them so they can have scripted reactions. I'm like, I fucking hate it all. Like, I mean, there's just so little left that I actually find valuable that there's people within the United community that I love very much.
Yep.
I still love when United play well and they have amazing moments that can still motivate me and move me. I still love the fact that I have a very close relationship with my kid over Manchester United, where we talk about this, but the contempt that I have for so many of the other stuff is something that maybe at its apex, at its peak. So I hope
Yeah.
that next season I rekindle that love.
Agreed. Agreed. I really do hope so as well.
Well, what I would like to see is you need to bring in a couple of exciting players this summer that move me. They don't have to win the league. They don't have
Yep.
to,
Yep.
win the champ. Obviously not Champions League next season, but they don't. I just want to be entertained a bit.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I don't want to see pragmatism. I don't want to see like. I want to be able to look forward to watching a game at the Etihad again instead of
Yep.
looking like this. Go, this is. I mean, let me know when it's over. I don't
Yep.
want to watch football, but so many of the games you might as well watch on teletext because
Yep.
it's all transactional. Just get the win. That's it. No, I wanted to spend more than that.
Yes.
It's always been more than that. So if you can't send the top players, that's okay. But send young players that come in and excite me and entertain me and make me want to
And are
watch.
hungry
I
and
love Manu.
motivated. Yeah.
Yeah, it's why I love Manu, why I love Garnacho, Hoyland, young
Yep.
players like that excite me. That are going, okay, there's something in that, like that you can have paint by numbers and you can get really nice pictures from that. Or you can
Yep.
have the Mona Lisa that comes from, this spontaneous, art, this creativity that moves you in a way that is not transactional. I miss that. And I mean, it goes back to something that Bielsa was saying
Mhm.
about the loss of the individual, where
Yes.
everything is just solely about the win, where there's no individual magic anymore. There's no genius anymore. There's no, everything's just so functional and mechanical. And it's like,
Mhm.
even the VAR stuff, which is just an attempt to remove human error from the equation, which just overanalyzes everything. And the whole game
Yep.
functions on an agreement between two people, two teams that were going to bend the rules.
Yep.
Otherwise, if you have an AI referee, the game stops every 3 seconds
Yeah.
because
Exactly.
what is enough contact for a free kick? That's that's subjective.
Yep.
Where subjective application of rules allows the game to flow. And then you get a human being making a decision that then they're now asked to take 3 minutes to make a decision that would normally take 3 seconds. And now you start thinking about all these other influential variables that now mean you never get consistency because referees think about what decision did I give last week and what decision did I give a week before and what my relationship like with this player and how inconsequential is this in the game? Is this home or away? All these things that you and I would be doing too, by the way, if we were in that situation. And then we get a decision that bears no resemblance to the actual offense. And then we're wondering why there's all this inconsistency because with this attempt to sanitize the game and remove all the abstract beauty from it that comes from uncertainty that has human error built
Some
into it.
randomness. Yeah.
Fucking shite, man. It
Yeah.
just is.
I know.
This is what I mean. It goes back to paint by numbers. Everything has to be precise, perfect,
Yep.
and when
It's
you
the
do that,
unpredictability of the whole thing that makes it
spontaneous
enjoyable.
happiness out of it.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why I thought about this is because when Scott McTominay scored that goal against Brentford, the second one,
Yeah.
I didn't celebrate it. I sat there going, "They're going to call us offside." So I thought it was
Right.
offside.
Yeah.
And then 2
Yep.
minutes later, they give it, and I'm like, "But the moment is gone.
Yep.
It's like getting a win by court order." You know, like this is what I mean by watching football on teletext. Let me know what the authorities decide, what counts and what
Yep.
doesn't, and then we'll, this is fucking stupid. Like, what are we watching? Anyway, I don't want to get so. But I just, honestly, like
I know.
when you try to take, when you try to remove human error, and remove the massive disappointment of having a decision go against you, also remove the happiness.
Yep.
So you can't do one without the other.
Yep.
And anyway, all right, been an hour rambling. We'll leave it there.
We're good. We're good.
Thanks to all of you for tuning in as always. We'll be back next week, of course. Don't forget to tune into my colleague here. He puts content out on a regular basis, so much more regular than me. So don't forget, follow both of our platforms if you can. That's the best way you can support the show. Much appreciated. And we appreciate the downloads and all the follows and all the comments on the pod. And we'll be back next week after the Rangers game. Take it easy, mate.
Sounds good. See you later. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.